Hey guys, my name's John, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought my life was picture perfect. I'm 38, married to Amanda, who I truly believed was my soulmate. We've been married for 8 years, living in Austin, Texas, in this cozy little house we renovated together. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was ours. We even had our favorite spots around the city, a little diner on the east side where we'd get breakfast every Sunday, the lake we'd kayak on during summers, and the park nearby where we'd sit and just talk for hours. Amanda is an interior designer. She's incredibly talented, the kind of person who can look at a blank room and turn it into something straight out of a magazine. She's also always had this magnetic personality. People are naturally drawn to her. She's confident, charming, and knows how to make anyone feel like they're the most important person in the room. Me, I'm a little more laid back. I run a small IT company. It's nothing glamorous, but it's steady and it let us live comfortably without having to stress about money. To everyone else, we looked like the perfect couple. Our friends would always comment on how in sync we were. Even my parents, who aren't the most expressive people, once told me how lucky I was to have Amanda, and honestly, I believed it. I thought we had something special, something other people envied. Our life was full of those little routines that make a relationship feel solid. Lazy Sunday mornings, drinking coffee on the patio, impromptu road trips to the hill country, Friday night dinners with friends at our favorite Mexican spot in town. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? I always thought that was just part of marriage. You stick it out and you grow stronger. For 8 years, I trusted Amanda with everything. I thought I knew her better than anyone else. She was my partner, my best friend, the person I couldn't imagine living without. But looking back now, I realize how blind I was. I was so wrapped up in the idea of us being perfect that I ignored the small warning signs, the tiny cracks that started forming beneath the surface. Cracks I brushed off because I didn't want to believe there could be anything wrong. And when those cracks finally gave way, it wasn't just a small break, it was a complete collapse. I'm here sharing this story not because I'm looking for sympathy, but because I know I'm not the only one who's been blindsided by someone they loved. Maybe you're feeling like something's off in your relationship too. Maybe you're in denial just like I was, telling yourself it's nothing, but trust me, sometimes those little things you ignore, they're the ones that change everything. And in my case, they led to the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my life. It started subtly, almost too small to notice at first. Amanda was always busy with her work. Her job as an interior designer often had her meeting with clients, running between showrooms, and spending long hours on projects. But lately, it felt different. She started coming home later than usual, often brushing it off with a quick, "Sorry, babe, the client meeting ran over," or "I lost track of time at the showroom." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Amanda had always been upfront with me before, so I had no reason to doubt her, but it wasn't just the late nights. She became distant. The way we used to talk about anything and everything suddenly shifted. She wasn't as engaged. I'd ask about her day, and she'd give me vague answers, distractively scrolling through her phone or pretending to organize something on the counter. Our evenings together, which used to be the highlight of my day, felt hollow. And then there was her phone. Amanda was never one of those people who was glued to her phone. She'd leave it lying around, forgotten most of the time. But now, it was always with her, like it was attached to her hip. She started setting it face down on the table, something she never used to do, and it was always on silent. One night I joked, "What's with the phone lately? You planning a surprise for me or something?" She laughed it off, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She just said, "No, it's work stuff, nothing exciting." But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Then there were the work trips. Amanda had never traveled much for her job before, but suddenly she had to go out of town for a few days to meet with a big client. I wanted to be supportive, so I didn't question it too much. Still, it felt off. The intimacy between us started to fade too. We'd gone from a couple who couldn't keep our hands off each other to barely sharing a kiss goodnight. When I brought it up, she said she was just tired from work, that she had too much on her plate. And again, I let it go, convincing myself it was just a phase. But those doubts, the ones I tried so hard to ignore, kept creeping in. Every time she laughed at a text and quickly put her phone away. Every time she came home late with a half-hearted excuse. Every time she turned away from me in bed, I felt that gnawing in the pit of my stomach. I told myself I was overthinking. Amanda wouldn't cheat on me. We were solid, right? She was probably just stressed, overwhelmed with work. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That maybe the life I thought we had wasn't as perfect as I'd always believed. One evening, after another one of Amanda's late nights, she came home and immediately headed for the shower. She looked flustered, her hair a little messier than usual, her tone rushed as she mumbled something about a long day at work. I nodded and told her dinner was on the stove, but inside, the doubts were gnawing at me. As she stepped into the bathroom, leaving her purse on the kitchen counter, something in me snapped. I don't know what came over me, but I walked over to her purse and opened it. I'd never done anything like this before. It felt wrong, invasive, but my gut was screaming at me that something was off. And then I saw it, a receipt from an expensive restaurant downtown, the kind of place we'd only go to for special occasions. And except this wasn't from a dinner we'd shared. The date on the receipt was from earlier that week, on a night she had told me she was working late. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, and dessert. It wasn't the kind of meal you'd grab with a client. It was intimate, romantic. When Amanda came out of the shower, her hair wrapped in a towel, I was sitting at the table with the receipt in my hand. "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes flicked to the receipt, and for the briefest moment I saw a flash of panic before she forced a smile. "Oh, that?" she said casually, walking over to grab it. "That was just lunch with a client. He's working on a big project, and I wanted to treat him to something nice to seal the deal." "Lunch?" I said, raising an eyebrow. This was at 7 p.m. She shrugged, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "Dinner, then. You know how it is with clients. They always want to meet at inconvenient times." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her, but something about her tone, the way she avoided eye contact, didn't sit right with me. "Amanda," I said slowly, "why didn't you mention this to me?" She rolled her eyes like I was the one being unreasonable. "Because it's work, John. Do I really need to update you on every little thing I do? It's not like it's a big deal." She grabbed the receipt and tossed it in the trash, her movements a little too sharp, a little too defensive. Then she kissed me on the cheek and said, "I'm exhausted. Can we just drop it?" I nodded, but inside, my mind was racing. This wasn't nothing. This was something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the receipt, the way she brushed it off, the way she seemed so irritated that I even asked about it. My gut was screaming at me that there was more to this story, but I didn't have proof. Not yet. And that's when I decided I needed help. If Amanda wasn't going to give me the truth, I was going to find it myself. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't let this go. Amanda's reaction to the receipt wasn't just defensive. It was calculated. She brushed it off so easily, like she'd practiced the response 100 times in her head. And while part of me still wanted to believe her, my gut was telling me there was more to the story. I knew I couldn't confront her again without solid proof. She'd just twist it, flip the script, and make me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. So the next morning, I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I called a private investigator. His name was Tom. Mid-40, straight to the point, no nonsense. When I met him at his office, I felt a mix of shame and determination. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person hiring a PI to spy on my wife, but here I was, laying everything out. Her late nights, the phone always face down, the restaurant receipt. Tom listened carefully, nodding as I spoke. He didn't ask unnecessary questions or judge me. He simply said, "If something's going on, I'll find out. But I'll warn you, once we start this, there's no going back. Are you ready for that?" I hesitated for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. But then I thought about the way Amanda had lied so easily, the way she'd made me feel like I was the crazy one for questioning her. I nodded, "Do whatever it takes." Tom got to work immediately. He placed a tracker on Amanda's car, set up discreet surveillance at her office, and monitored her movements over the next few days. I felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread every time my phone buzzed, knowing it could be him with an update. The waiting was excruciating. I'd sit at work, pretending to focus on spreadsheets and emails, but my mind was always elsewhere. Was she lying to me again? Was she with someone else right now? A week later, Tom called. "I've got something," he said. "Can you meet me in person?" My stomach dropped. I drove to his office that evening, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I walked in, Tom was sitting behind his desk with a folder in front of him. He slid it across the table without a word. Inside were photos, Amanda, dressed to the nines, walking into an upscale restaurant downtown, and then there he was, a man I didn't recognize, meeting her at the door, pulling out her chair. They were laughing, leaning in close, their body language too familiar for it to be a professional meeting. "His name's Nate," Tom said, breaking the silence. "They've been meeting at the same restaurant regularly. No physical contact yet, but their behavior suggests there's more going on than just business." I stared at the photos, my heart pounding in my chest. There she was, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, smiling at another man like she used to smile at me. Tom continued. There's no hard evidence of an affair yet. But this isn't just work, John. You know that, don't you? I nodded slowly, my throat too tight to speak. When I left his office, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the pictures in my lap. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted with everything, was lying to me. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed the truth, the whole truth, and I was willing to wait for it, no matter how much it hurt. After seeing those photos, I couldn't look at Amanda the same way anymore. Every smile she gave me felt fake. Every touch felt hollow. I wanted to confront her right then and there, shove the evidence in her face, and demand answers. But I knew better. She was too good at deflecting, too good at spinning things to make herself look innocent. Instead, I played it cool. For the next few days, I acted like nothing had changed. I still asked her about her day, still kissed her goodnight, still pretended that I wasn't dying inside every time she smiled at her phone or came home late with another excuse. Meanwhile, I kept in touch with Tom, asking him to keep digging. Then came Friday night. Amanda said she had to work late again, something about finishing a big design project for a new client. I smiled, nodded, and told her to take her time, all while my stomach churned. As soon as she left, I called Tom. "Where's she now?" I asked. It didn't take long for him to confirm what I already suspected. She was at the same restaurant meeting Nate. Again, the next morning, I decided to test the waters. Over breakfast, I casually asked, "How's that new project going? The one that's keeping you so busy?" She looked up from her coffee, hesitating just long enough to make my chest tighten. "Oh, it's fine. Just a lot of moving parts. You know how it is." "Do I know the client?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered. "No, he's new. Small business owner looking to expand his space. Nothing exciting." Nodded, pretending to buy it, but inside I was fuming. Small business owner expand his space? The guy didn't even own a business. Tom had already confirmed that much. She was lying to my face, and she didn't even flinch. Later that evening, I decided to drop a small bombshell. While we were sitting on the couch, I turned to her and said, "I've been thinking about taking you to that restaurant downtown. The one you like so much? What's it called again?" Her eyes flickered with panic, but she quickly masked it. "Which one?" "The one you've been going to for work dinners," I said casually. Her face went pale. For a moment, she didn't say anything, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with an explanation. "Oh, that place," she said finally, forcing a laugh. "Yeah, it's nice, but it's really more for business than date nights." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but I could see the unease in her eyes. She knew I was poking at something, even if she didn't know how much I already knew. I didn't push any further that night. Instead, I let her sit with attention, let her wonder if I suspected something. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the doubt and paranoia that had been eating away at me for weeks. But I wasn't done, not even close. The truth was still out there, and I was going to find it. After days of sitting on the photos and keeping my suspicions to myself, I realized I couldn't hold it in much longer. I needed to catch Amanda in the act. Something undeniable, something she couldn't talk her way out of. One Thursday evening, Amanda told me she'd be working late again. This time, she claimed it was an urgent project that had to be finalized for a client presentation. I pretended to believe her, smiling and telling her, "No worries, I'll take care of dinner." She kissed me on the cheek and left, as if nothing was wrong. But I knew exactly where she was going. I called Tom, who confirmed what I'd expected. Amanda was on her way to the same restaurant she'd been meeting Nate at. I told Tom I didn't need him to tail her this time. I'd handle it myself. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced the entire drive to the restaurant. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that there was some logical explanation for all of this, but deep down I knew the truth. When I pulled up to the restaurant, I parked a few spaces away and waited, watching the entrance. Sure enough, within minutes, Amanda walked up, wearing one of her favorite dresses, the kind she only wore when she wanted to make an impression. And then he appeared. Nate, a guy I didn't even know existed until 2 weeks ago. He greeted her at the door, pulling out her chair like some gentleman straight out of a rom-com. I sat there for a few minutes, watching them laugh, lean in close, share what looked like a bottle of wine. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of the car and walked straight into the restaurant. The hostess looked up, smiling, and asked, "Do you have a reservation?" I shook my head. "No, I'm just here to see someone." She gave me a confused look, but didn't stop me. As I scanned the room, it didn't take long to spot them. Sitting in a quiet corner, completely absorbed in each other, I walked over, my heart pounding in my chest, and stopped right at their table. Amanda looked up, and when she saw me, her face went pale. Nate turned to see who I was, his expression shifting from confusion to something resembling fear. John, Amanda stammered, her voice trembling, what are you doing here? I stared at her for a moment, the anger and betrayal boiling just beneath the surface. I could ask you the same thing, I said coldly. She opened her mouth to say something, probably another lie, but I cut her off. Save it, Amanda. Go home, alone. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her and Nate sitting there in stunned silence. As I drove home, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Anger, sadness, relief. I didn't even know how I felt anymore. All I knew was that I'd finally seen the truth with my own eyes. When I left the restaurant, I got in my car and drove home, but on the way, I stopped at a bar and spent an hour there. When I got home, the lights in the living room were already on. When I got back home later that night, Amanda was waiting for me in the living room. She looked like she'd been pacing. Her hair was a mess, and there was a glass of wine on the coffee table, barely touched. I could see the anxiety written all over her face. For the first time that day, I saw something in her expression that made me hesitate. Fear, but not the kind that comes from guilt. It looked genuine. As soon as I walked in, she stood up, her voice softer than I expected. John, please, can we talk? I closed the door behind me, letting out a deep breath. What is there to talk about, Amanda? Everything, she said quickly, stepping closer. You're jumping to conclusions without knowing the full story. I need you to hear me out. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. Fine, go ahead. Explain why you've been sneaking around with Nate and lying to me. She didn't hesitate. She walked over to the coffee table, picked up a folder, and held it out to me. This is why. I took the folder cautiously, my eyes narrowing. Inside were papers, contracts, emails, detailed proposals. As I flipped through them, my heart started to pound. It was a legitimate deal. A contract for the purchase of a small company with Nate listed as the owner. What is this? I asked, my voice softer now. It's what I've been working on, she said, sitting down and gesturing for me to do the same. Nate owns a small interior design firm, and he's been looking to sell for months. I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to expand my career and bring in more income for us, but I didn't want to tell you until it was finalized. I wanted it to be a surprise. I stared at the papers, flipping through the pages and reading every line. My nose perked. It all checked out. Business meetings, financial details, even a timeline of the deal. Why didn't you just tell me? I asked, my tone softening. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. Because I wasn't sure if it would work out. I didn't want to get your hopes up, especially if the deal fell through. And I knew you'd be skeptical of me meeting with another guy so often. I thought keeping it under wraps would be easier until I had something solid to show you. I sat there for a long moment, the weight of the past few days pressing down on me. I wanted to stay angry, but the evidence in front of me made it impossible. So, all of this was just for work? I asked quietly, looking up at her. She nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Yes, John, I swear. I know it looks bad, but I was only doing this to help us, for our future. I leaned back, letting out a long exhale. The tension in my chest started to ease, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Okay, I said finally. I believe you. The relief on her face was instant. She reached out to take my hand, squeezing it tightly. Thank you, John. I know I should have told you earlier, but I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry for making you feel like you couldn't trust me. I nodded, still processing everything. Just no more secrets, Amanda. If there's something this big going on, I need to know. We can't keep doing this. I promise, she said, her voice earnest. That night, for the first time in a while, we sat together in the living room, talking. Like we used to. I felt a glimmer of hope, like maybe we could move past this and rebuild the trust that had been shaken. But deep down, there was still a small part of me that couldn't shake the doubts completely. Something about this still felt off. A few days after our conversation, life seemed to be getting back to normal. Amanda was more relaxed, more affectionate, and for the first time in a while, I felt like maybe we were in a good place. I kept telling myself that the paperwork she showed me was enough, that there was no reason to doubt her anymore. But as much as I wanted to believe her, something still didn't sit right with me. It was like an itch in the back of my mind I couldn't scratch. Every now and then I'd catch myself replaying her explanation, thinking about how she'd been so quick to produce the paperwork when I confronted her. It felt too convenient. That nagging feeling eventually got the better of me. One afternoon, while Amanda was out running errands, I picked up the phone and called Tom. Hey, John, Tom answered. Thought we wrapped everything up. What's going on? I hesitated for a moment, feeling a twinge of guilt for reopening something I'd told myself was closed, but I couldn't ignore my instincts. Tom, I need you to check something for me, I said finally. Sure, what is it? I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. That company Amanda says she's buying, the one Nate owns, can you dig into it? Just to make sure it's legit? There was a pause on the other end. All right, what's the name of the company? I gave him the name Amanda had mentioned and added, I just want to be sure. I need to know everything checks out. Got it, Tom said, his voice calm and professional. Give me a day or two and I'll get back to you. I thanked him and hung up, my chest tight with anxiety. I didn't want to go down this road again, but I knew I wouldn't have peace of mind until I had the truth, whatever that turned out to be. For the rest of the day, I tried to push it out of my mind, but the doubts lingered. What if I was wrong to reopen this? What if Amanda really had been telling the truth? But deep down, I knew I had to do this. I couldn't let those doubts fester any longer. Now, all I could do was wait. 2 days later, Tom called me back. The moment I saw his name pop up on my phone, my stomach dropped. Hey, John, he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made me grip the phone tighter. I sent you everything I found. Check your email. I didn't bother responding. I hung up, grabbed my laptop, and opened my inbox. Sure enough, there was an email from Tom with the subject line, about the company. With shaky hands, I opened the email and clicked on the attached report. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the document, my worst fears becoming a reality with every word. The company Amanda claimed she was buying, it didn't exist. There were no records of it, no tax filings, no state registration, no online presence. Tom had even looked into Nate, running a full background check. The man didn't own a business he never had. The so-called deal Amanda had been working on was a complete fabrication. As I kept reading, the anger inside me grew. Tom had included screenshots of emails and records that confirmed Amanda had gone to great lengths to make her story believable. She had created fake documents, pulled together enough details to convince me, and lied to my face without hesitation. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. The woman I had trusted with everything, who had sworn up and down that she was working on this deal for us, had gone to incredible lengths to cover up her lies. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand over my face. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but all I could do was sit there, staring at the report, feeling the weight of betrayal crushing me. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eye, show me those fake papers, and swear on our marriage that it was all for our future? I closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, my mind racing. There was no doubt now. Amanda wasn't just lying. She had been lying all along, from the very beginning, and now there was no going back. I picked up my phone and called Tom. When he answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. Thank you, I said, my voice cold. You were right. I should have trusted my gut. I'm sorry, John, Tom said, his voice soft. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I hung up without another word. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, I made a decision. Amanda had lied to me for the last time. It was time to confront her with everything I now knew. And this time, there would be no more excuses. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the report from Tom open on my laptop, waiting for Amanda to come home. I was done with games, done with pretending. This was it, the moment I would finally lay everything out on the table and demand the truth. When Amanda walked through the door, she greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, babe," and set her purse down on the counter. She had that same relaxed, carefree smile she'd been wearing since our last conversation. It made my blood boil. "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat. She froze, her smile faltering as she turned to face me. "What's wrong?" I gestured to the laptop. "Sit down." Amanda hesitated for a moment before slowly making her way to the table, and the printer was running, and the printer was dying before she got there. She looked at the laptop, then back at me, her expression wary. "What is this about, John?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I spun the laptop around to face her, showing her the report. "This," I said, "is the truth about the company you've been trying to buy. Or should I say, the company that doesn't exist." Her face went pale. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words. "John, Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't even try to lie to me again, Amanda. I gave you every chance to come clean. I wanted to believe you, but this," I gestured to the laptop, "this proves you've been lying to me the whole time." She sat back in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. "It's not what you think," she said weakly. "Not what I think," I said, my voice rising. "Then what is it, Amanda? because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been sneaking around with Nate and fabricating an entire story to cover your tracks. Do you know how insane that sounds?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't falling for it, not this time. "Why, Amanda?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Why would you go to these lengths? Why not just tell me the truth?" She finally looked up at me, and what she said next hit me like a punch to the gut. "Because I needed something more, John." I stared at her, stunned. "Something more? What the hell does that even mean?" Her tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. Our marriage. It's become routine, predictable. I needed something exciting, something that made me feel alive again. And Nate, he was just there. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The woman I'd loved, the woman I trusted, was telling me that our life together wasn't enough for her, that I wasn't enough. I stood up, pushing the chair back so hard it scraped against the floor. "So what, you thought lying to me, sneaking around behind my back and pretending to care about our future was the solution?" She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know. I was stupid, okay? I didn't know how to fix things, so I ran. I thought if I hid it, I could figure it out without hurting you." I shook my head, my heart shattering with every word she spoke. "Damn, you didn't just hurt me, Amanda. You destroyed us. Do you even understand that?" She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "Please, John, I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us." I stared at her for a long moment, the weight of everything crashing down on me. "It's too late," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "You already gave up on us the moment you decided to lie. I can't do this anymore." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing at the table. That night, I slept on the couch, knowing that tomorrow I would be filing for divorce. There was no saving what we had. The trust was gone, and so was the love. This was the end. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with a pounding headache, the weight of the previous night still pressing down on me. Amanda was nowhere to be seen, but her purse and keys were still on the counter, so I knew she hadn't left the house. I sat there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. 8 years of marriage gone in the blink of an eye. I thought about the life we'd built together, the trust we once had, and how it had all crumbled under the weight of her lies. By the time I pulled myself off the couch, I knew what I had to do. There was no fixing this. Amanda had shown me exactly who she was, and no amount of promises or tears could undo the damage she'd caused. I got dressed and grabbed the file of evidence from the kitchen table, the report from Tom, the photos, everything. Then I left the house and drove straight to my lawyer's office. When I walked in, my lawyer, Mr. Davis, greeted me with a sympathetic smile. He had been my family's attorney for years, and I trusted him to handle this with care. "John, good to see you," he said, motioning for me to sit. "What brings you in today?" I placed the file on his desk, my hands shaking slightly. "I'm filing for divorce," I said firmly. Mr. Davis nodded, his expression serious. All right, let's go through the details." We spent the next hour discussing the process, dividing assets, the house, everything. It was surreal, sitting there and talking about dismantling a life I had spent nearly a decade building. But as painful as it was, it also felt like a weight was being lifted off my shoulders. When I got back home, Amanda was waiting for me in the living room. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked like she hadn't slept all night. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice small. I held up the divorce papers. "I went to see a lawyer," I said plainly. Her face crumbled, and she sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. "John, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything you want. Just give me a chance to make this right." I shook my head, my voice steady, but "You've had your chances, Amanda. You chose to lie to me over and over again. You chose Nate. You chose to destroy our marriage. I'm done." She sobbed, begging me to reconsider, but I couldn't. I had made up my mind. I packed a bag that night and stayed with a friend for a few days while I figured out the next steps. Amanda continued to text me, pleading for forgiveness, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized. I got the house as Amanda agreed to move out and start fresh somewhere else. She apologized one last time before leaving, but it felt hollow, like an afterthought. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, spent more time with friends, and started exploring hobbies I'd long since neglected. It wasn't easy. There were days when the anger and sadness crept back in, but I reminded myself that leaving Amanda was the best decision I could have made. Now, as I sit here writing this, I can honestly say I feel free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, and the weight of trying to fix something that was beyond saving. So I think to get out of a wheelchair and recognize I'm still, for anyone reading this who's going through something similar, trust your gut. Don't let someone else's lies make you question your worth. It hurts like hell, but sometimes walking away is the only way to truly heal. And as for Amanda, she made her choices, and I made mine. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me what you think about that story. Have a good day, and bye.